Boker Tov, everyone. Rabbi Eric Solomon here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Very bright, beautiful, cold morning, and back for some morning Torah. So we're in Parshat Bo. We're in the section of the Torah dealing with the book of Exodus and our freeing of Egypt and the dynamic with Moses, Moshe, Aaron, Miriam, with Pharaoh, the plagues. Things are going. And I want to bring it down to this very last, nearly last scene in the story, which is quite profound and often somewhat, I think, perhaps overlooked. At the very end, after the final plague, the slaying of the firstborn, many of you know the story, right? The last plague of the 10 is Moshe says to Pharaoh, listen, whatever comes from your mouth is what's going to happen back to you. And basically, Moses, God will punish you. And Pharaoh says, well, I'm going to slay the firstborn of the Hebrew, Israelite, Bnei Israel. And sadly, that's what happens back to Pharaoh and the Egyptian society. And there's a famous line that there was not any house in Egypt that was ein bo met. There was a death in every house. At the very end, as we're leaving, and Moshe's leaving, and you can imagine the dynamic of feeling victorious, having freed our people, the sense of, happened in a tragedy, of course, but the idea that finally we're going to be free, and Moshe has brought us to that place. And the last thing Pharaoh says, he turns to Moshe in this powerful verse and says, bless me. Pharaoh says, bless me. So there's a lot to this. Why would Pharaoh want a blessing from Moshe? Why at that moment? And then why would Moses even consider doing that to his oppressor, to the person who killed, attacked, enslaved? So, there's a lot of depth to this. Rashi, the traditional commentators bring up the issue basically that Pharaoh himself was a firstborn child, and so possibly the blessing was an attempt to, Pharaoh basically kind of gives up and says, Moshe, I know you'll protect your people, please protect me personally. That's one possible read. It doesn't necessarily work. It's a little asynchronous. I don't know if it works perfectly or anachronistic. I don't know if it works great with the order of the Torah story, but that's one kind of self-interested work, which would be consistent with Pharaoh's ways. But I want to just go and just bring this dynamic, more fully, right? Really flesh it out. Pharaoh is an evil figure. No question about it. He oppresses, kills, attacks, enslaves. He's also a leader. He's the leader of society, Egyptian society. He is also considered a god in that community, and often refers to himself as a god. But we know that leaders who are, in this position, are incredibly isolated, especially in a dictatorship when no one is really, or very few, or we would understand, tell the dictator the truth because they're afraid of their attack or their lives are at stake. So Pharaoh is a very isolated figure. In fact, I'd say Pharaoh is a lonely figure. And perhaps even Pharaoh, who recognizes that he has sinned, if not before that, at least now, and certainly lost. By saying that Moshe blessed me, he's basically saying, I recognize that your God and your interpretation of life and the way things are and freedom and slavery was all wrong. I'm asking you to bless me. It's not just about self-interest, we can imagine. It's also about kind of a moral reckoning, a cheshbon, that Pharaoh's realizing, I'm really been in the wrong. And to ask Moshe, the leader of the Jewish people, Hebrew people at that time, to give him a blessing is kind of saying, I give up, I've lost, I'm wrong. Now we know later, actually, Pharaoh's give one more try. But that moment, we could read this as Pharaoh doesn't have anyone else in his society who's willing to be honest with him, connect with him, understand him. And he turns to Moses, who he sees, in a sense, like his rabbi, like his pastor. The only person that can give him any type of spiritual guidance or tikkun. Now, of course, the great paradox is Moses, we'd imagine, must hate Pharaoh, or is disgusted by Pharaoh, or angry at Pharaoh. We can only imagine all the feelings Moshe naturally would have against his oppressor, against the nearly annihilator of our people. Babies, right? This is how the story starts. So how can Moshe even do that? Why didn't Moshe just tell him, go to Azazel, as we say, go away and, or attack him? Who knows? In fact, there's just silence there. There's no response. Implies that, that Moshe didn't say anything, but may have offered the blessing, in fact, and to bless him. So what does that mean? And I want to come here to, a very profound question is asked of me as a rabbi, but really of clergy in general. What does it mean to get a blessing, or to be or someone to ask us for a blessing, a clergy person, a rabbi in my case, when the person's behavior has been immoral? Sometimes that immoral behavior may be something they committed against their family members, their spouses, children, society. They may be even in jail. Or maybe that immoral behavior, or unethical behavior, or mean-spirited behavior is against the clergy person, like me. What if someone who has acted poorly towards me or the synagogue or Jewish leadership or my board president, like been really horrible in their behavior, whatever it may be. Maybe it's not illegal, but certainly immoral or insensitive at the least. But then they're in a pace of their life. Maybe they're in a moment of crisis, moral crisis, life crisis. We've all been there. Maybe they're in health crisis. Maybe their life is coming to an end. Don't they deserve a blessing too? This has been something that I've struggled with as a rabbi over the years. I've written about this. Some of you know, and I visited a prison, infamous Butner prison here in outside of Raleigh, which is a federal institution where infamous prisoners are kept. And what's the role of a rabbi or pastor? But in this case with Moses, Moses does bless Pharaoh. Doesn't say anything, stays silent. Doesn't tell him it's okay what he did or that he should feel better. But he channels God's blessing through Moses, through Moshe, onto Pharaoh in his time of ultimate crisis. What do I think this means? I think this means, first of all, that all human beings universally have moments where they have a spiritual crisis. All. Now, not everyone seeks out a clergy person or a pastor or whatever, rabbi, in that moment, or moments. May have other relationships or friends, families, therapists, mentors. But we all face that question of our mortality, of mistakes we've made, where we realize we were wrong, we want to repent, want to confess, and want to feel a sense of being cleansed, and the help of someone who we trust. In this case, Pharaoh sees Moses as the only one that can possibly understand him, even if he was the one who he oppressed. And on the other side, Moshe has to make a decision as a leader. If he can get past his own pain, hurt, insult, injury, and give to Pharaoh even what is most difficult and painful for himself. Now, I want to say that I don't think Moshe should be a model for everyone. I can't give that blessing to everyone. There are people that have done such, if someone, God forbid, an extreme example, Hitler came to me or my ancestors and said, bless me. I don't expect the Jewish people to bless Hitler, God forbid, Yamak Shemo. Or for a white supremacist who kills people of color or enslave people or kill Jews in Pittsburgh, for us to bless him. There are people in the Jewish tradition, we are not some kind of saints that don't have feelings, don't have injury. We do. Rabbis are not something better than spiritually. We may have some wisdom, we may struggle with these things, we study, we focus, we pray, but we spend more time maybe, hopefully we hone, but we are human beings too. And yet, I do see Moshe's behavior here as an inspirational challenge. Can we as clergy, and really as others as well, can we turn to these people who are suffering, who have acted improperly, immorally, even attacked us, and find a way in their most challenging moment to see ourselves and kind of do what's called a bitul neshama, like a kind of suppressing of my own in order to serve a purpose that's greater. And I wouldn't say this is everyone's policy, and everyone has to make the decision what would work for them. Someone's abused sexually, physically, and that abuser wants, by the way, which has happened, and we see in society, sometimes generations later, they ask and beg for forgiveness of other descendants of those who have suffered, including the Holocaust, slavery, etc. So there's this deep spiritual need at times for people to apologize, even if the person themselves didn't do it, maybe their descendants do it, or others who feel connected to that sin. But perhaps there is a power to particularly religious leaders to doing everything they can to offer a blessing. That blessing does not say what you did is okay, or I forgive you. just saying that you are made in God's image too. You are deserving of God's love and even blessing, even if you have acted terribly and horribly. And maybe I'm not the right person to give that blessing. Maybe someone else will. But as a human being with basic dignity of human life, you deserve a moment where you feel that you can come to God through a person. So again, on the extremes, this would be extraordinarily difficult, but in general, even for me, I have learned, and I've been in those positions where someone who's acted poorly, horribly, in general or towards me, but a moment of their lives needs God's blessing and needs help accessing God's blessing. And I've been that person, or Rabbi Jenny's been that person. And we have tried to follow Moshe's unbelievable example. Not forgiving, not saying all's okay, not saying putting up aside, or not praying that you're perfect or lying. No. But saying you too are deserving of blessing because you are B'Tselem Elohim. And we will do our best to channel that as best as we can with God's help. Even if there are still consequences to your actions that you must face. And that's what Moshe, essentially, my read, my drush, my take, is with Pharaoh, that last point. Pharaoh wants a blessing. Moshe can feel that isolation, loneliness need, and he gives it. But he doesn't do it inauthentically or lies about it. He just gives it. Even Pharaoh is deserving of that time too. Please, God, a sweet Shabbat for all, a safe Shabbat. And when we all think about blessings we need, who gives us those blessings, and honoring the fact that the role of a spiritual leader, it's so profound and such a privilege, but spiritual leaders are people too. It's challenging. Shabbat Shalom.